All right, we're still waiting on a few more folks to join, but we'll go ahead and get started today. Thank you all for joining our call today. I know it's difficult managing both work and home life in these unprecedented times, but thanks for taking the time out of your day to listen to our discussion on digital advocacy this morning. Before we get started, I'd like to start off by just running through our presenters and telling you a little bit about their backgrounds and the expertise that they bring to the table. First, we've got Abigail Floyd and myself, Charles Kelly, on the line from McGuireWoods Consulting Advocacy team. We both specialize in digital advocacy and communications specifically. I'm a vice president of digital and come from a Virginia-based political and nonprofit management background. Abigail is an assistant vice president of digital and comes from the world of nonprofit management. We've also got a few folks on the line from Phone2Action, based out of Washington, D.C. For those of you who may not be familiar with Phone2Action, and we use them as a vendor, they're one of the premier advocacy software companies in the nation. They allow firms like ours and other businesses and clients to facilitate the process of letting individuals and other stakeholders easily connect to their local and state and national elected officials and government entities. From Phone2Action, we've got Eric Rosedal, who's their head of alliances and stakeholder impact. He was previously with the National Association of Manufacturers, NAM, running their advocacy shop, and prior to that, he directed federal advocacy efforts at a few public affairs firms. We've got Stephanie Stauffer, who is their director of strategic accounts and comes from the world of digital advocacy. She's previously worked at two DC-based public affairs firms and also comes from the world of broadcast television. And then last but certainly not least, we've got Michael Droback and Greg Walden, both from McGuireWoods Consulting's federal government affairs team, and they both specialize in emerging technologies. Before coming on board at McGuireWoods, Michael worked as head of government affairs at Netflix, and he held senior roles in government affairs at two technology organizations. He's also got a deep political background, served nearly 10 years on Capitol Hill in the offices of three separate U.S. senators. Greg is a national authority in the aviation and government ethics spaces. He's served previously as chief counsel of the FAA, an associate deputy attorney general with the DOJ, associate counsel to George H.W. Bush, and as a member of the Interstate Commerce Commission for President-elect George W. Bush. I'd like to thank all of our presenters for taking time out of their day and hopping on the call to speak to all of us today. Just as a reminder, we will be taking questions if time allows at the end of the call. If you want to ask a question, there should be a box on your screen that says questions and answers. Just go ahead and type your question in there and hit submit, and it'll appear on our screen. And if we have time at the end of the call, we'll take it. If not, we will try to get back to you as soon as possible to answer any questions you might have. And now I'll just turn it over to Abigail Floyd really quick to jump into today's program and talk a little bit about how you should run a digital advocacy campaign during COVID-19.
Thank you, Charles. As we all know, the world has changed significantly in the past months, to say the least, and that also includes the digital landscape and how people engage online, how ads are delivered, and the costs associated with both of these. Right now, what we're seeing is that engagement rates are up significantly across the board, and as a result, advertising costs are also relatively low. Both of these things likely have to do with the vast majority of the nation under shelter-in-place or stay-at-home orders, causing them to work from home, surf the internet more, and use social media more than they normally do. So now is the prime time to advocate online, but the ultimate question we'd like to answer for you today is, should you partake? We'll give you some useful information and trends we're seeing to help you answer that question for your client, your business, or your organization. As you'll see, while metrics may be in your favor for the time being, the types of advocacy campaigns being run today are very targeted in their approach and very subject-specific to COVID-19. These ads and campaigns mainly deal with affected industries, both those on the front line, like healthcare, as well as those in affected and essential industries, like food and beverage, hospitality, construction, and other similar industries. And the subject matter for these campaigns mainly deals with providing more resources to those workers in those industries. To give us a better take on what exactly the federal government is doing in that regard, both with the recently passed CARES Act and with potential new legislation on the horizon, I'd like to turn it over to Michael Droback and Greg Walden to talk a little bit about what the policy landscape is shaping up to be in Washington.
Thank you, Abigail. The CARES Act is the third of what may be 4 or 5 acts of Congress to provide relief in the wake of the impacts from the coronavirus. It was enacted March 27th and had a number of programs. Some are already up and running, others have not yet started, and we'll just briefly go through these 4 or 5, then I'll turn it over to Michael as to what is coming next. The first out of the box, the airlines received up to $32 million in grants for payroll that they had to apply by last Friday. The next program out of the box is an SBA billion. 32 billion. If I said million, whoa, okay. The SBA Paycheck Protection Program is $349 billion. That you could start applying last Friday, and a lot of you probably know that there were some hiccups with banks as well as with the SBA. There's going to be a move to this week in Congress to add another $250 billion to that $349 billion because it's becoming readily apparent that that's not going to be enough. The next out of the box, airlines again, this time only loans and loan guarantees, but also in addition to the air carriers, we have ticket agents, repair stations, and businesses critical to national security. And that's a total of $46 billion in loan and loan guarantees. What many businesses are waiting for is a pot of money that's $454 billion. And the direction in the CARES Act is to give the Federal Reserve the authority to stand up a mid-sized lending program for businesses between 500 and 10,000 employees. It's not clear how much of the 454 would go into that program because that's not the only program that would be authorized under that amount. Treasury would be able to create some other programs that perhaps would deal with businesses greater than $10,000, 10,000 employees. Michael?
Great. And so, obviously the first of these 3 acts by Congress in coordination with the administration are not going to be sufficient to address what's already been specified as a unique situation for the country, for the globe. And so there is a credible and reasonable concern about how we get the economy back up and running, how we jumpstart it, how industries that were not addressed in the previous act will be encouraged to continue to hold on to their employees and also to look to be a part of the reinvigoration of the economy. However, there's some concern about how to do that. So there are proposals that the initial thought about CARES 2 or a Phase 4 bill was that it would be a stimulus program and it would address all of the different impacted industries, which is almost every industry, but there are some, including hospitality and travel. There's a host of other industries that have been dramatically impacted. But I think what really seems to be where both parties are going more focused on the Democrats right now is that there needs to be a broadening of the relief programs and an extension of the CARES program. So direct payments to individuals and broader and long-term access to unemployment benefits, paid sick, family and medical leave, more support for state and local governments, hospitals, community health centers, health workers and first responders. And so I think there really is a focus on families, business, and health workers now, that there will be a need for additional resources. And that's been the focus from the Democrats. There was discussion about an infrastructure package being put into this and a number of other kind of related or tangentially related industry activities, but they're really focused now on what's going to be needed for the families, businesses, and health workers. I would say, just as an aside, the Republicans are saying they all returned to Congress. So Congress, they'll be back in session the week of April 20th. The Democrats are suggesting they want to see a bill considered before the end of April. Republicans are saying, let's see what we need. Let's see what's necessary here. So Leader McConnell has been very clear that it cannot simply be that we pass something or enact something quickly without some due process, some consideration of what's needed. So there's disagreement about whether there has to be an immediate action, and the Republicans are saying we don't expect to see anything passed before the end of May. So I think we'll see what the needs are. I also want to point out that just in terms of industries, they are beginning to suggest that they're putting together proposals for the administration and for Congress as to what will help them to steer the economy into kind of safer, calmer waters. And so we expect a lot of advocacy and influence and the need for information, especially through digital platforms, as industries get more engaged on saving their workforce, encouraging growth and development of programs within the economy, and also growing their business or recovering from what is a unique situation for our country. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Michael and Greg. This is sorry, Charles, I was just going to chime in there. So this is Stephanie from Phone2Action. I can, go ahead and take it from here. So, obviously, as what we just heard from that legislative update, there's sort of two pieces to this that I want to talk about from the Phone2Action perspective. And as Charles said at the upfront, so Phone2Action, for those of you who maybe are not as familiar, is an advocacy, a government affairs technology platform. So we work with about 700 different clients across industries, across different types of organizations, so nonprofits, trade associations, and corporations. And really what we have seen is there's two parts to this. So there's the, kind of shock and awe moment that we saw really pop off that week of, March 16th when people started working from home and the shelter-in-place orders were starting to, come about across the country, and Congress was, scrambling through their initial phases of stimulus. And then there's the kind of path forward from here, right? So as Michael was just talking about, that phase 4 component and what that next CARES Act potentially looks like. So from the Phone2Action perspective, we have seen record engagement on our platform up until today. The past several weeks, we have had more than 1 million people take action on the platform. They have delivered more than 4 million messages to Congress. So that's not only federal Congress, the U.S. House and Senate, but that's also state legislatures, some local legislatures as well, where it has made sense. And, the organizations that have been most effective to date have been sort of the obvious ones, right? The healthcare programs, a lot of the restaurants, the travel organizations. So American Nurses Association is one. They've had tens of thousands of people engage on their campaigns. The American College of Emergency Physicians is another. But then there's the Restaurant Association, U.S. Travel Association. And, really it's those industries that have been hardest hit and, frankly, had the biggest stake in some of the earlier phases of the recovery. So what has really worked best from, across the board from all of these different groups is making it really easy for people to take action and send messages to their lawmakers. And that's what Phone2Action is really good at, and what our bread and butter is setting these organizations up for success by giving them a set of tools that allows really simple and an easy launch of these campaigns. And right now, especially, I think we're in a very different environment from the advocates' perspective, because people are multitasking, I think, more than they ever have been, right? They're set up at home offices, they're at makeshift desks in their living rooms, they're on their phones, they're texting people, checking their social media, checking in with friends and family. They're also trying to wrangle their kids in the background or their pets, et cetera. So you really have to reach them where they are, and that's where these, digital tactics that Michael and Greg were just alluding to can really come in handy, where, you're using text messaging to get people connected, you're using social media to get people connected, and, really making it as easy as possible for them to take action. Eric, did you want to chime in on, kind of your perspective on all of that for a minute?
Yeah, hey, it's Eric Rosal. Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a historic time, as Greg and Michael talked about. I mean, this impacts everybody. It impacts our families. We're concerned about our health. We're concerned about schools, how we're going to get schools back and going again. But also on a professional level, right? There's so many uncertainties right now. You know, when is the stimulus 4? When is stimulus 5? When are the state legislatures going to get started engaging? And also, you know, elections. Look at Wisconsin yesterday and how the Supreme Court had to get engaged. So there's just a lot of unknowns, but everyone's impacted. But what we do know, as Steph alluded to, is that Americans are really engaging more now than ever. I mean, they're looking for data, they're looking for facts, and as Steph says, they're looking to take action. They want their legislators to hear from them. They want them to act, and they want them to act quickly. And I think, you know, as Steph said, that, you know, we've seen that we're at the front lines, and we've seen millions of people take action and send millions of emails, calls, and texts to their governors, to their congressmen, to their state legislators. And obviously, you know, the pandemic is really it's turned advocacy to the digital front. And, you know, the reason is, as everyone has said, the home screens, people are on their laptop. The other things that we haven't really talked about is that people are getting a ton of traffic. So, you know, with email traffic. So, you know, you have to use social media because people are on Facebook, they're on LinkedIn, they're on Twitter, they're looking for information, and they're looking to make sure that their families and their friends are okay. So, you know, social media is one way to cut through the noise. And the other interesting thing that we're noticing is that people want to tell their individual story. They want to tell their business story. They want to tell their employee story. So I think, you know, that really is where we're heading. Is the digital front is the most important for getting your advocacy goals accomplished for 2020.
Yeah, and Eric, I'll take that and expand on it a little bit, because that was the other point that I wanted to make. And this is a more macro trend that we've seen over the last probably 12 to 18 months at this point, but has been very much the focus for this COVID response, which is the storytelling. And, you know, previously in, you know, my career in Washington and a lot of y'all's careers, I'm sure, in grassroots, we've been focused on what I've kind of deemed the volume-based approach, right, where you get thousands of people sending in the same message, and legislative offices are just inundated with all of these form letters. And what we have started moving to quite a bit, and we've seen organizations like Expedia do this just in their COVID response, is encourage people to tell their own personal message and give them tools that allow them to customize that message so that it's not just a form letter, and it really is more of a, you know, personal story that connects better with that legislative office, also allows that advocate to feel like they are having more of an impact and sending that more, you know, higher quality, higher value letter to their lawmaker. And that's something I think that we're going to see a lot more of going forward too, as we look at some of the, you know, the next steps in legislation and, you know, some of the next phases of how this, you know, pandemic is going to continue to play out. I've had personally numerous conversations in the last just few days with, you know, corporations now looking to see how can they engage their employees. I've talked to oil companies and ag producers and some of these organizations that are going to fall into the categories of business that are included in future solutions and legislation. And I think that's where we're going to have much more of a longer term impact. You know, it's not going to be as much of this kind of shock and awe, you know, flash in a pan type campaign, but we're going to see a lot more organizations start to build more proactive, you know, longer sustained advocacy programs as, you know, executives are continuing to try to find creative ways around, you know, the current limitations of traditional lobbying. Charles, I'll let you take it from here.
Great, and thanks again, Stephanie and Eric. Very insightful, and it's great to see, you know, what the trends are out there, and I think it's, you know, eye-opening, quite honestly. Just wanted to mention real quick as a reminder, we're taking questions if time allows at the end of the call, so feel free if you're logged in online, there should be a question and answer box. Feel free to type in a question, hit submit, and we'll try to get them as the call concludes. I just want to dive in right now. Obviously, we've heard from Stephanie and Eric of kind of what the trends are looking like online. We've heard from Michael and Greg on kind of what the current situation and landscape is federally, both right now and moving forward. So I think the question a lot of you might have in your minds right now still is, should you engage? For some on the call, that answer is going to be yes. For others, it's going to be no. For some, it might even be maybe. We'll see. So I'd like to kind of break it down into the yes and no boxes. For those of you that might have businesses or clients in industries that may be affected by either the current or the kind of the next iteration of federal relief efforts, I think you should most definitely start thinking about getting your stakeholders involved in some way, shape, or form, whether that is, direct advocacy, advocating on behalf of your company, whether that is advocating on behalf of your industry at large, receiving some part of that support or resources during the pandemic. I think you really need to start thinking about that if you haven't already. If you're a business, your employees, your partners, your vendors, your investors, they're all going to see value in that and most likely engage. If you're an association, your members, your stakeholders there are definitely going to see value in it. And I think that, most importantly for associations, is important during this time when all your members are, looking to tighten their belts and their budgets and kind of reassessing their funding priorities and where they're going to allocate the, resources that may be dwindling in coming months and whatnot. If you're a consultant or you're an attorney on the call, then I think your client, is most definitely going to see value in you thinking outside the box and strategically suggesting that they reach out to their stakeholders and engage them if it makes sense. If your instance is one where you specifically need more resources, front lines, healthcare, restaurants, that sort of, those sorts of folks, from what we've seen here today, there may even be people out there with little or no connection to your industry that are willing to advocate on your behalf. And as Stephanie and Eric both said, that all depends on getting the message in front of them. Social is really where it's at right now. And putting the right messages in front of them, asking them to advocate to the right folks at the right levels of government. As Abigail mentioned at the onset of the call, right now is probably one of the best times to engage. Engagement's high. You've got a captive audience, as Stephanie and Eric alluded to, that's just very attuned to the situation at large and the plight of some specific industries as well. And they're more than willing to want to do something about that and contact their legislators therein. With regards to ad space, there's virtually unlimited inventory, as Eric and Stephanie said, as folks are basically at home all day and largely shifting all of their activity online, which means it's very cost effective to advertise right now and push folks to your advocacy efforts. That is kind of the bucket of, if you should, this is what you should start thinking about. But I also want to take a second, because there might be those on the call that might be wondering, I don't think I should do this. The optics, the timing isn't right for my business, for my industry right now. So I want to take a second and speak to those folks. I think the answer, there is, while it may not be the correct time to engage in a direct advocacy effort, that doesn't have to stop you from still attempting to engage your stakeholders and possibly those outside of that audience in some way, shape, or form. I think it all depends on what you're doing and how you're making and messaging the ask. If you're not affected, it's probably definitely a good time to lay low and not make any large legislative asks beyond COVID relief. Governors, other elected officials, they're wholly consumed with responding to the pandemic right now, and essentially your issue is probably going to take a back burner for the time being. So if the optics and the timing isn't right, which for some it's not going to be, definitely don't try to engage in large legislative asks. but I don't think that should stop you being creative with your outreach and promoting other sorts of content and outreach. You can always make your actions less advocacy specific and still capitalize on those high engagement rates and low costs and increased delivery on digital and social. You can list build. You can, put feelers out to ask people to sign up for newsletters and just kind of general low-level, easy asks, not any, hard pushes to advocate directly in the legislators. You can serve as a resource, much like we'll talk about in a second, where Phone2Action has, where McGuireWoods Consulting has, and multiple others have, just trying to aggregate resources for those that are affected and promote that content. And kind of the last bucket there, even if you're not necessarily affected, but if you are actually helping out on relief efforts, if your employees or your stakeholders are volunteering, promote that. If you're a great example of this one is going to be distilleries across the nation, kind of retooling their supply chain to make hand sanitizer for the front lines now. There are other companies that we've talked to that are completely retooling their entire supply chains or portions of it to produce masks, to produce gowns, to produce, Apple's producing face masks now. So there are a lot of good opportunities out there to promote the good in your community and in the nation at large that you may be doing out there. And last but certainly not least, I think you can keep your ear to the ground, just, as Michael and Greg alluded to and others. Just because you're not affected right now doesn't mean you may not be affected by future legislation. Online and offline, you can monitor, you can track that legislation and efforts therein, and how, both that legislation, future executive actions might affect your business, your client, your organization. Just that landscape's rapidly changing, and I think it's better to be prepared in that case and prepared to engage ahead of time rather than thinking of it in the moment as those decisions are announced. And kind of on that note, with regards to, resources and what's out there, I'd like to just turn it over back to Eric from Phone2Action real quick to talk a little bit specifically about what resources they have and how you can view those.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Charles.
Eric?
So, again, Phone2Action is a technology company. We work with public affairs and lobbying shops and advocacy groups. And, what our software, our technology does is it allows you to recruit supporters, and those supporters can tell their story to elected officials from the president all the way down to their city council elected official. Our clients are corporations, trade associations, and nonprofits. As Stephanie said, we have over 700 clients. And right now we're kind of at the front line. We're seeing all this activity, and we're learning real time what's going on and how advocates are responding and what messages advocates are responding to. So the biggest, takeaway that I would like to talk to you guys about is just, as a company, our largest growth is corporate and trade association advocacy. Corporations and major trade associations realize their best advocates are their employees and their customers. And we work with like Walmart, Dominion, Nestle, Fidelity, and we work with like the U.S. Chamber, Pharma, and NAM. And they're looking for, they use our software as a tool because it's easy, right? Our software is kind of like Netflix and Amazon. People can take actions very quickly with very little input, and that's in today's world, you have to have tools that are very easy, very user friendly, because if they're not, people won't take action. I guess our top tips right now are what we're seeing and what everyone should be kind of looking at for not only the pandemic, but for the election and for future advocacy is texting. We are seeing a huge bump during the pandemic with texting advocacy, because you can push it out on your social channels. You can also, you can also use it on advertisements. You can have elected officials push it out. It is a huge growth, and it's really easy to set up. It just also cuts through the noise. As I talked about, people are getting inundated with emails. If you have their cell phone number, they're going to see it. You know, it's just like if your wife or your spouse wants you to get, you know, go to the grocery store and get milk. They're not going to email you. They're not going to call you. They're going to text you. So advocates are the same way. You need to be able to easily cut through that noise. And then what we're also noticing is Convo. Basically, what we call is our Convo platform, which is basically like a Mad Libs. Think of when we were kids, and you'd answer questions, and by the end you'd have a complete sentence. Well, we have software that allows you to create, by writing 10 questions, allows you to tell a story. So an advocate can easily go, and I can say, it'll say, hello, what's your name? And I'll say, hello, my name is Eric Rosedahl. I'll type in my address, and then I can say, what's my top issue? By the time I answer those 10 questions, I've got a beautifully crafted organic letter that can go to a member of Congress or a governor or any elected official. So that's a huge growth. It also allows people to tell their story. They want to tell their story. So allow your advocate to tell your story. And most importantly, I think, you know, get out the vote. I think this is a presidential year. People are going to be looking for tools, and I really think that, you know, they're going to be looking for, am I registered to vote? Candidate information on the state and federal level. And so these are all tools that we have. If you'd like to learn more, we're at phone2action.com. Also, we have a really great resource blog on COVID-19 and telling all these stories of what many of our nonprofit, what our trade association, and what our corporate clients are doing. We also set up a Hear Us Now campaign. So if you just want to send that out to folks and they can tell that their own story to their elected official and where they need help, you can plug into that. And again, you know, as Charles said, McGuireWoods is a great partner, and they do a great job of managing the campaigns. And so I would strongly suggest if you want to get engaged, if you need to get engaged, reach out to Charles and Abigail and use them as a resource. They're wicked smart, and they really know digital advocacy cold. Charles, that's all I got.
Thanks. Great. Thanks, Eric. And yeah, as Eric outlined, they've got Phone2Action has some great resources specific to COVID-19. Their president, Hemina, is doing a kind of subject-specific newsletter weekly on COVID-19 and engagement rates that they're seeing. Extremely insightful, and what prompted this whole webinar to take place, really. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention McGuireWoods Consulting and us also serving as a resource. If you visit our website at McGuireWoodsConsulting.com, we've got a little COVID button at the bottom of the page, resource center there. It's got a ton of information on, one, obviously how we can help you during this pandemic and beyond, our service lines and how those may help you with dealing with the COVID crisis. It's got updates on federal and state government responses to the pandemic, how it's affecting the legislative landscape, and a whole lot more information. Definitely check that out. And then, as Eric mentioned, if you feel like you should, or even if you feel like you shouldn't engage right now, don't hesitate to reach out to either myself or Abigail or some of the other consultants we have on the line, just to discuss, how we can help you, what are the best practices, should you not. More than happy to talk it out. And also, as Eric mentioned, we value our relationship with Phone2Action and can get you guys up and running very, very quickly on Phone2Action. And that is very ingrained in our digital workflow. So just don't hesitate to reach out if we can be of any assistance during these times. And kind of with that, that kind of concludes today's agenda. We've had a few questions that I'd like to, pick on a few folks on the line about today. And if we don't end up getting yours, we will, we'll probably take one or two, but we'll get back with you after the call to better answer those. I think the first question, and this is probably for either Eric or Stephanie, you had mentioned, millions of actions taken over the past 2 weeks. what is kind of the baseline there that you see normally? Like, how can we contextualize that increase in actions? What do you normally see there?
That's a great question.
Wait, I'll go
I
first
actually
and
can
I'll let
take.
Stephanie.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Eric.
I would just say this is historic. We've never seen traffic like this across our platform for the last. I mean, the company was founded 7 years ago, and we've never seen this amount of traffic. Our trade association and nonprofit clients alone in the last 3 weeks have launched over 1,000 campaigns to their members and to their supporters, and it's just record-breaking. Steph, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I was going to say, I actually was talking to my marketing team about this morning and got some really great data from them. So just to put things into perspective, in the month of January, when, Congress was coming back and state legislatures were coming back and that kind of thing, we had about, I would say, 30% of the number of connections delivered in January than we did this month. So in other words, I mean, it was, about one, I'm looking at the numbers right here. So maybe 1.5 million connections versus 4 million connections this month. So this is, we've seen actually the numbers have doubled since February. They are significantly higher than what we normally see in a typical month.
I mean, just think of this, Charles.
Great.
That was during an impeachment too. So there was a lot of activity and a lot of traction on social and a lot of, it's a highly polarized issue. It's just amazing the amount of traffic that's going through Phone2Action and what our clients are and how they're engaging. I think the reason that they're engaging is we've all talked about. Everybody's impacted by this pandemic. Everyone's concerned about their family. Everyone's concerned about their job. And so it's kind of I hate to say it, but it's a perfect storm for engagement, right? You've got people that are interested, and it impacts them, and they can easily take an action digitally. So it really blends nicely for that.
Great. Thank you for that insight. And then the second question, which the last one we'll take today, is obviously we've mentioned a lot of how social media platforms are a large part of online advocacy, especially right now during the COVID-19 crisis. And I can probably answer this question and let Abigail and then our federal folks also chime in if they see any kind of legislative trends there. But the question is, how are social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, some have recently announced that they're disallowing political ads and content. How do we see that evolving, and how do we see, specific to COVID-19, how and if that is affecting those types of content? And I can go first. I'll let Abigail chime in right after me, and then Michael and Greg, if you want to add in any sort of the federal nuggets of, potential regulations coming down the pipe, that'd be great. But I think, at least for the time being, haven't really seen much on that front changing with specific regard to COVID-19. Twitter has kind of disallowed at-large political advertisements. Facebook, will approve it on a conditional basis, and then there are a bunch of requirements therein, disclaimers and archiving of the ads and whatnot. I do think this falls under their political advertisement policies. So a lot of ads are actually, whether they're informational, whether they're advocacy specific, are falling under that purview of political ads and all the requirements therein. I don't foresee, and I could be drastically wrong, but I don't foresee in the next couple of months that being there being any sort of a huge change with that regard to their policies. I think they are pretty well established, and I think that they work well for this, in addition to other, advocacy efforts as well. I just don't see that changing, especially given all the uncertainties out there. What I do think they're doing a great job of is trying to tamper down on some of the misinformation that is out there. Facebook specifically has noticed an uptick in some misinformation campaigns being put out there, and are doing a great job of trying to identify those and, squelch any misinformation or misinformation campaigns that could, negatively affect the response to COVID-19. And those are ongoing. They always are. There's bad actors out there, and there always are going to be. It's really playing whack-a-mole there for them. But I do think specific to COVID-19, that's one area where we are seeing them enforce a little bit more. So it's always important to just be honest in your messaging. If you're not an authority, don't try to be one, and really don't spread misinformation. I don't think anybody would rightly do that under the auspices of their business or organization, or for any of their clients that are on the line today. But that's just something to keep in mind as you move forward. And Abigail, if you have anything else to add, feel free. And then Michael and Greg, if you're seeing anything kind of on the federal front with regards to, online platform regulation, feel free to chime in as well.
This is Abigail. I agree completely with what Charles said. I do think it's probably something that we should all keep an eye on, just in case bad actors do start to, get through the social media restrictions, or if there's any negative blowback once we start to return to normal. But I think, just like Charles said, keep your message true to your brand and just be patient, because there is extra scrutiny, and companies are they don't have the staffing that they have. So Facebook in particular has been very upfront, saying that they're running behind, or it's taking a little extra time to get things approved. That's all I have to add.
This is Greg. I would just add that before the coronavirus took the front page, the back page, and everything in between, and all TV everywhere, cable, the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission were conducting investigations of Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple, and the House Judiciary Committee was conducting an investigation itself. Those are probably still working at the staff level, and once we get back to a little bit of normality here, I think you're going to see those investigations mature to some point. Whether we see any legislation or regulation that actually moves is a fair question and an open question, and really cannot be determined with any cannot even be prognosticated, given that we don't know when we're going to get back to that sense of normality.
Great. Thanks, Greg. And, we've got a few more questions. I'll try to reach out to them offline and answer them as well. But at this point, that concludes our agenda. And at this point as well, we hope that you've got a pretty good idea of whether or not you think you should engage or not. And again, feel free to reach out to myself or Abigail or anyone else on the call with regards to, a potential advocacy campaign. We're more than happy to talk it out and help. I'd like to just take a moment to thank all of our speakers again today: Eric, Stephanie, Michael, Greg, Abigail. Thank you all for taking the time out of your busy day to talk to folks on the line. And thanks everybody on the line for taking time out of your day to attend and listen. We hope you got something out of it. And again, just everybody stay safe and have a great rest of your afternoon. And thanks for attending. Thanks. Bye.